Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel, and in this video I'm going to be working more on my web framework, and I want to build out the view helpers for my framework, which that's what I wanted to do in the last video, but it turned out there was still a lot of challenges and things in the way for me even getting to that point. But I'm happy to say that in that video I did fix a lot of things, and also today when I was working on the framework, uh, and I wasn't really making a video, I wasn't recording, but I also fixed a bunch of things and improved the framework. So one thing that we have now is I fixed the bug. So in the last video, for some reason, whenever I would create a new post, all of my records were, it seemed like they were just getting replaced or they were all being updated. But in reality, all of the records were still there in the database. They were fine. But what was happening was the way that I was creating the object for each post, I was overriding uh, like all of the basically I was like overriding the attributes on each post object, and I'll show you in my code just because this is the easiest way to do it. So before I had a lot of code in my initialize block. So whenever you would initialize a new model, like a new post object, I would then inside of here define methods based off the methods that the person passed in the args. And the way that I was doing, the way that was happening was not good. Like it was overriding. Basically, it was defining a method every time you initialize a model, and then it was overriding the definition for all of the different objects that would call that method, which then it had like this whole weird glitch. It was very weird, but it's because the way that I wrote my code, and luckily I already got rid of that and I solved the issue. So the solution that I have come to, which this took also a bunch of debugging and engineering to figure out, because initially I was defining the inspect method right here in initialize, which is not a good way to do it because it was also overriding it for each one. And I was also defining all of the attribute methods. So now what I'm doing is I have a method, a class method called define attribute methods, and you have to call this manually after you require the model. And I just did that in my framework because whenever you start the server or open the console, I already call this class to load the model. I call the autoloader class. So inside of here, it's going to loop through all the model files, which are the files that are found inside of the user's model folder. And then I take this and I try to get the model name, which, I already know that this is not going to work because we're grabbing it from the file path. And what if there's like a post slash comment namespace model? Then it would try to just initialize this because, or it would capitalize this and then we try to get the constant. So this would not work. So what we do have to do is we have to basically, before we, I guess, or we could do it after, we need to split at any slashes and then join it with two colons because that's the way that you join classes. And I think before we do that, we have to make sure that we capitalize each of these pieces. So we can do a map and capitalize instead of doing this line, and then we join it. And this should be a better way of getting this model name. So that's on the autoloader, just to grab our model name, and then we're turning it into a constant with the object const get, and then we're calling a class method on here to define the attribute methods, which will then go to this method right here. It's going to loop through all of our model attributes, which is a method I defined down here, where I take the attributes, which the attributes is a method which actually makes a query to the database to grab the columns and all the rows. So this is probably not the most, I don't know if this is This is not like the most performant way to do this because, of course, if you have a lot of rows on your table, we're just pulling those, not even using them. So I'm gonna need to refactor this. Should probably add a to do here. Find a more performant way to get the column names from a table. So that's a good to do to have. And then if I'm ever like thinking about something to do, I can kind of work on that. But this is what it's like when you're solo dev. You know, you don't have anybody else to work on things. So I'm just doing everything by myself. But if you guys are watching and you want to contribute to this new web framework, the code is open source and it's available on GitHub. So all you have to do is go over there and then create a pull request and put your changes in. And I could talk more about how to do that if you're not really familiar with contributing to code, but for right now, I'm just going to focus on this. So we take those column names basically, and then we can cat them with the default fields, which I already have. And now that I think about it, those fields should already be inside of the database when we create the table for the model. So I don't think we actually even have to do this concat step now that I think about it. So I can probably save, you know, some lines of code because I don't think that's really needed. So instead of calling model attributes, we can just call attributes, which we already have defined, and it'll pull out all the fields from the database, or all of the column names from the database, and we'll define that. And then what we're doing is I'm defining the method for that name. So let's say that you have a field name for like the post, we have title and we have body. So we're defining those methods. And then I'm grabbing them from this virtual attributes instance variable. Just simply like that. And what I do is when you initialize the model instance, I set the virtual attributes instance variable just to args. So we have all of those things available. And see, I even had like to-dos, need to fix code. This is actually not even a problem. So when I did this thing, like it's only one line of code, but this worked way better than the code that I had before, which was like 30 lines. And that'll happen a lot when you're programming. And it's a great thing when you come to these conclusions and these realizations. Even though like I understand what's going on, but it's kind of surprising that it's this easy compared to the code. Like I was going crazy with it because I'm new to metaprogramming. I really haven't done much of it since I've just been working in frameworks and not really building libraries like this. So this is very, very cool. And then right here, I overrided the inspect manually on the instance. And this is working now. We're also grabbing the values from the virtual attributes instance variable because that's kind of where I store it. Rather than having, let's say like rather than having an instance variable defined for each attribute, right? That's what I was trying to do before. I was looping through and I was defining. I wasn't even defining an instance variable. I was defining a method that returned a value, and that's probably not the best way to do it. And there's also another thing where I remember I tried to have some other code where I did like the instance variables or instance variable set, and when I passed in title, it said like title cannot be an instance variable or something like that. So it was a weird thing, and that's kind of what led me to my other solution of not even using an instance variable. But then when you think about it this way, we can just use a virtual attributes instance variable, as simple as that is, store the args, and whenever you initialize this, we'll have those values. And then we already know that we already know what the column names are, so we're not using the virtual attributes for the column names. We're using the ones that are already defined on the table, which means if I go over to my app, let's just open up the console. We do a post.new. Okay, this is interesting. So this isn't, I guess the inspect fails on the post.new. And you'll see that it fails because this isn't the one that we're supposed to, that I want to see. If I say post.last, it also doesn't work. So I think there might be a bug here. And then if I want to see the error, I can say .inspect manually. And you will see that we do get an error. So it says undefined method model attributes. Oh yeah, because remember I just deleted that method. And I just want to do a quick search. It looks like that's the only place that we're using this old method that I deleted. So now we're just going to replace that with attributes, which is going to, again, it's going to make a query to the database. So it could kind of slow down methods like this, especially if you think about it. This inspect is getting called every time you initialize an object, which I do just for formatting the model object. So whenever like you call .all, it's going to first grab the rows and the columns, and then it's going to format the model object, which is going to, well, here actually I try to do something to help with the performance where you could pass in the columns that you already have, so we don't have to make a whole another call. So that is good. And it looks like we're just using the rows directly, so we're not using the virtual attributes, but then we initialize it, which sets the virtual attributes here, and I think inspect is called somewhere around there. Or maybe it's only when you call it inside of the console. Oh look, post.last, yes, we got the correct one. The only thing that's not correct is the ID. It's using the object ID instead of the ID here, and I think Rails uses the post ID, but you'll see that this is a string that represents the object. So when you like call post.last and you return the object, I think maybe this is only in pry, but they call .inspect on it, which as you can see returns this string, which is formatted and everything. And I have defined that string here. So you have the inspect string. I put the class name here. Oh, this is bad actually. Look, I hard coded the class name. Oh, I can't believe I did that. So what that would mean is, because this is just in the Jetski model and this is an instance method, basically we do have access to whatever the dynamic class is. Now in my social app, of course, I have the post model. You know what? I'm gonna put this back just so you guys can see. This is totally a glitch. So if I go into social app and I want to try to generate a new model, say bundle, say Jetski generate model thing, and then let's just do content text. Boom! Now we have this new thing model, and I'll go back into the console. So I'll do Jetski C, and we now have a thing. And if we say thing.new, look at what it's returning. It's returning a post as the name. So that's why it's not a good thing. I was hard coding it here. So what we can do to fix this is we can remove this hard coded post and replace it with a self.class.toString, which will get the class, and it'll turn to a string, which will just be whatever the name of the class is. And this should work. Let's see. So if I say thing.new, you'll see it returns a thing as the name, and then it also has the fields that it has, which is very cool. So by default, we have the created at, updated at, and ID, which I set those as default fields whenever you create a new model, which happens inside of the Jetski CLI helpers, generate, and then the model method. So I do this create table SQL, and inside of there, which is inside of the database, or no, where is it? It's inside of the create table SQL. I gotta see, where is that? I think that's defined right here. Okay, on the database base module. And what this is going to do is it's going to manually generate the SQL using a string and then just adding to it with Ruby. This is probably also not a very clean way to do it, but I made it work. Yeah, it's super long. If you look at how much code is here, it's a lot. So here is where those default fields are defined. So I'm adding them right here, and then we have created at, updated at, which are both date times, and then I have ID, which is an integer. And then what I'm doing is I'm looping through all the field names that the user would pass in, and I'm splitting them because I need to check for the field data type. Because the user can pass in a data type to change the type of the fields, which is what I do. Like when I set the body to type text, so I use the colon text, and my code is able to do that. I also have a method to check the data type, because sometimes when you're passing, when you're setting the data type in SQLite, like for example a string, you have to use this varchar 255 line. But in other cases, like for text, you basically don't have to change it. You can just leave it as text. So I did this. I just returned a string. So this method is really only just for checking if it's going to be a string, and then setting the varchar 255, which is, I guess 255 is the character limit. So you can change this to anything. You could put it at 5, but then they can only pass in 5 characters. So 255 is a lot more for a string. And if you're familiar with coding or like Ruby on Rails, I always remember that people say like a string is useful for small pieces of text, but when you want to store a large piece of text, like a blog post or like, you know, anything larger than 255, it should be stored in a text field, because this is just a limit on strings. But we do have that at the max by default. Yeah, I just wanted to explain this create table SQL method real quick. But I'm happy I fixed my inspect code. We did have that hard coded, but we got through it. And then, yeah, the way that I'm doing this, the way that I'm defining the attribute methods after we load the model. See, I'm doing this in the autoloader. This is what I did to basically so that I could have my attributes as methods on my instance of my class. Because your model, like if you think about it, a model can have different fields, and those are attributes. It also has the default fields like ID and created at, and I want to be able to access those just like in Rails, how you can access the attributes on the model. So that's why I had to define the methods on the class, and I have to do it dynamically because this is a web framework, and it's not just, I don't know what the user's model is going to be called or like what it's going to be. Well, I do actually in my code base, because I'm able to scan and find the models. As long as they, use the correct model names, because I do some parsing on the file path. But I think I fixed basically what the problem was here. I fixed it, and yeah, I think like I'm happy with the solution. Or I'm not really happy, I'm not happy that I have to call this method, but I'm just happy that it works. And I tried to, like, let's say I just tried to like run this code outside of the method. I already tried to do that, and you can do this because it'll run it as a class method when the file is loaded. It'll run this because it's outside of a method. But the problem is that when it tries to make the request to the database, in the attributes method right here, see, it's trying to get the pluralized table name. So the table name is just taken from the class to string, and when it does it in this context, it's going to be jetski model as the table name. So it's going to try to like look that up as a table, which doesn't exist. So yeah, that's why I had to move it into a method. And I figured, hey, maybe I can just call the method after I already have loaded the file and I know the model name and everything. And that's what I did here, and it works. So I was able to fix that bug. And yeah, I think from here, everything's working. I can try another test. Everything is working. Yep, everything's working. This is awesome. So what I wanted to do next is I wanted to build the view helpers. I've been wanting to do this for a few days, but I had to get past these little challenges to get to this point. And now I'm ready to start building out some helpers for the front end. And I think the first one that I want to build is for forms. So I'm going to go to my social app example, and I'll go to the app views, post index. And inside of here, there's a few places where I want to have view helpers. Like for creating links, I want to be able to do a link to, just like Rails. And because I like doing that. Also, one thing we could do here is we could render this postcard as a partial, which in the last video, at the end of that last video, I created the render method, which is different from the render in the controller, and it allows you to render a partial relative to your current path. So that's the one catch, and I'll have to work on that. But what we can do is we can say render and then pass in post as a string, and it's now going to look for a post partial. Oh, and then we have to work on adding locals, so setting the local variables, because right now render isn't going to expect any extra parameters, but we'll get to this. We're gonna do this right now live. So anyways, it is gonna look for a partial. So for right now, let's just reload, and we get the error. So you see error, no such file or directory, and it's looking for the partial. So this is almost just like Rails. Like, this is what happens in Rails if you tried to render a partial and you didn't have the path. It just renders an error. So we have the same thing going already, which is cool. Now what I want to do is inside the post folder, I want to create a new file and call this _post.html.erb, and that's what a partial is. And then we can drop our code inside of here. But as you can see, we're expecting to have this post variable, so we're going to have to somehow pass this in to our partial. And okay, that is unexpected. Guys, that is unexpected. So what is happening now is it's just rendering our HTML template without processing the ERB. So without running the ERB code, it's just returning it as a string, which is not good. Actually, you know what? It's returning it as HTML because you can see the styling on the header and the p tag. So it's rendering it as HTML, but it's not rendering it as ERB, which makes perfect sense because if we go to the Jetski library, and I remember from yesterday, I didn't even think about this. I didn't think about this edge case. But then that means that the modal doesn't have any ERB. Yeah, it doesn't. Look, the modal is just plain HTML, so that's why it worked. But when we tried to render a template that uses ERB, we see this error that the ERB is not getting processed. So we have to go and fix that right now. And the way that we can do that is very simple. We just have to go to our helper, go to our view helpers, and right here where we're rendering the partial, we're just grabbing the path to the file, which we have determined will be at this location, which is going to be relative to whatever controller they're inside of. So whatever folder they're already inside of, it's going to be relative to there. And then we're just reading the file, so we're just dumping the contents of the file onto the page, which is being interpreted as HTML. But what we really want to do is we want to process this as ERB. And I'm already doing that inside of my view renderer class. So I'm going to go there to check the example. So right here we create a template, and then we do the template result binding. So I'm just going to copy this, and then I'll take this and I'll go to my view helpers, and I could just rewrite this code, but I wonder, maybe I should move this into a method. So I had a method before called process_erb, which, oh yeah, I still have it. Yeah, I have it right here, and it's useful. The only difference is that we're running this grab instance variables method right here to copy all the instance variables, and I don't really want to do that on this render. Yeah, I don't want to do that on this render, so it's a different type of render. What I can do is I can make my own method. Maybe I'll do a private method inside of this module. So I'll add a private section, and I'll just create a method, and I could call this process_erb. It could be the same method because it's on a different module. See, it's totally different from the other process_erb, which is defined inside of the Jetski view renderer. The one in the Jetski helpers view helpers is totally different. Although we are inside of the view renderer, we are including the Jetski helpers view helpers, so it might override it. But it's inside of the private section, so I'm wondering if maybe it won't. But then when we call it inside a render, it might use the wrong method. So we should probably call this something different. Let's call this process. What do I want to call it? This is another hard part of programming. So we're doing it inside of render. I mean, yeah, maybe I won't even put it into a method for now, unless we need to do this more than once. But it's only 2 lines, right? So it's not too bad. So we have the template, and then we're saying template result binding, which I don't really know why we have to do this, why we have to pass in binding. I should probably learn more about this. But anyways, I have to pass in this content of the file, so let's set this to content, and okay, this should work. So as long as it works, I don't really care too much. Let's reload, and we get our first error. So errors, undefined local variable or method post. Just like I said, because we are not supporting locals right now, but I want to add that in right now and do it live. So in Rails, what you do is to pass a local in, you would just pass it in as a key value pair. So let's say we want to pass in post and set this to post. And actually there's a couple more fancy things that they have in Rails, like you could just pass in post right here, and I think it would pass this in as a variable. And you could also just, instead of even putting the name of the partial, you could just say render post. But I don't want to get into that. I just want to start simple with something that can be reused in other scenarios as well. So we're going to just render a partial with the name, and then we're going to pass in a local, and I want to make this work first. So if we reload, now we get the error, wrong number of arguments given to expected 1. So we need to change our render method to expect more than 1 argument. So back in our view helpers module, I'm going to add a comma here in the render in the arguments section, and I'm going to do a double stars args, and really we can just call this locals because that's what we're going to be expecting. And what the double star does is it allows you to pass in arguments as key value pairs. Instead of, if we said like locals equals hash, I think this is different because it's going to expect you to pass in a single hash that contains all the key values. But if we do the double star, or the double, yeah, I guess it's just double star locals. I also don't know if you're supposed to say locales or locals. That's probably just an English thing. Let me see. Coding. Yeah, I really don't know what people call it. I think in Rails it's called locals. Sometimes I see it a little different, you know. So now we see undefined local variable or method post. So we still get the same thing, but we have the locals here. We're passing it in our social app. So how do we pass it to the template? That's the real question. How do we pass instance variables to the template? We need to almost like define them on the class that we're in. I don't even know if that's how you do it. Let me try to reload. So now we're inside of binding pry. And I put a binding pry here because I want to do some debugging. And this is the tool that I really use for debugging because it opens a console. It even shows you the code context so you can remember where you're at. And we have our content. So this is the content. It's very, very simple. And then we're going to try to render it as ERB. But the problem is that we don't have a variable or method called post here. If I try to call that, it says nope, there's no variable post. There's an at post, but there's not a post. So I need to temporarily define like a local variable. Define, how can we do that? So I'm just going to look that up. Dynamically define local variable in Ruby. So right here we have a Stack Overflow question. How to dynamically create a local variable. And it says you cannot create local variables in Ruby 1.9 plus. You could in Ruby 1.8 using eval. No, there's got to be a different way there's got to be a better way to do this. Oh, you can do a binding local variable set. Look, for Ruby 2.1 added local variable set. Okay, so that's what we need. Yeah, you know what? I think this is so perfect. This is exactly what we needed. And I have to learn what binding is. I don't really want to do it right now, but I'm very curious because I use binding pry. Now we're passing in binding here, and it looks like now we have to do a binding local variable set. So anyways, what we're gonna do is we're gonna grab locals. We can say not for each because that is from JavaScript. We'll say locals each, and I'll pass in a block, and we'll get the key values, and then we're gonna try to set. We're gonna run binding local variable set with the key and then the value, so we can define this local variable, and hopefully then we have access to it inside of the template. Let's see what happens. To reload, and we still get no variable post, even though we should be passing it in. Yeah, we're passing it in right here, post. So let's do another binding pry right here. It says undefined local variable or method post for an instance of Jetski view renderer. Now let me see. I'm in binding pry. Is there a variable post or method? No, there's not. Even though we looped over the locals, which we should have. This code should have defined. It should have set a local variable. Oh, but I wonder if, because it's inside of a block, if it's setting it inside of the scope of this context. So maybe binding is really just like saying like this is the context that we're in right now, which could be inside of a method, could be inside of a class. So maybe if I'm thinking about it that way, which I also saw in the example here, see, they defined bind equal to binding first. Maybe I should say bind equals binding, and then inside of my loop, I set it on the bind defined here, and then I pass in that bind to my template. And that worked. That somehow worked, which is crazy. Now, what if I just pass in binding to my template result? It doesn't work. So this is actually pretty awesome, because we're able to define like a bind, whatever this is, we're defining some context, we're setting local variables on it, and then we're rendering a template in that context, and everything works beautifully somehow. Look, it works. Okay, this is awesome. Side note, I need to learn what binding means in Ruby. But this is so cool. I can't believe, look, it just works. So boom, we fixed the render method. And the cool thing about this is that if you're just passing in an HTML template that doesn't even need ERB, it still works, right? But of course, in our framework, inside of Rails, you primarily only use ERB templates. You don't really ever use anything else besides ERB. So having this render method, which is just focused on using ERB, it does make sense, and I think this is awesome. I'm so happy that I was able to fix this, and I got to do it live too, which is even cooler. So boom, we got that out of the way. Whew. So see, that's the thing. Like, I start a video, I say, hey, I want to build the view helpers, but then on the way I fix like all of these different issues, and I improved my framework a bunch. So maybe actually real quick, we should commit what we have on the framework. So if we do a git status, we have 4 different files changed. And I want to do this just so that we can separate our changes. This is mostly like, doing some code updates. So I'll add all those file changes, and I'll do a commit message. I'll say code improvements, many, process ERB in view helper render method, remove basically unneeded code, and fix bug in inspect. So I'm kind of documenting all the different things, although it really doesn't matter. I could just have said code improvements many. But there we go. So I push that code, and then now I want to get back to the point of the video. Let me make sure my video is going. Okay, it looks like it's perfect. So let's get back to the point of the video where I want to build the view helpers, and I'll show you where I want to start. So if we go back to our posts index, we've now added render, and we have the ability to pass in locals, which is awesome. Now what I want to do is I want to go to the modal file. So in the views posts modal file, here's where I have a form defined. And again, we could take this and shove it into another file, but I don't want to do that. Let's just take this form, and what I want to do is I want to start with building a form view helper. So instead of like writing this HTML by hand, I can just say form. I think like in Rails we say form with, and they used to even have form for. I think I might just say form, or I might even say form tag. See, this is one thing with naming. What do I want to call it? I could say form for or form width. I think mostly form width also works differently. How you can like pass in a model, you can pass in the URL option. You have all these different options that you can pass in. And that's why Rails is pretty awesome. Like Rails is super awesome. If you think about it, it has all these different edge cases already solved by different people. And it's very, very helpful. But for me, I just want something simple. So maybe I'll just call it form. And then I'll pass in the URL /posts. And then I'll want to pass in a block because I need to have all the content inside of here. And then the method, I think, could default to post, but you'd be able to change the method to like get, or you could change it to put, whatever you want. We should be able to pass that into. But I guess the default method, we could think about what we want. Maybe it should be get. I think that's already the default method. So let's just expect that we have to do something like this, but it is in Ruby instead of having to write the HTML. And then I'm going to delete that form tag. I'm also going to delete the ending form tag. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to move it inside, or I'm going to select all this like inner content, and I'm going to move it inside of now I'm having trouble remembering what the command is. I think it's what? Yeah, I think it's option. There we go. Option and then the up arrow. So now I moved all the content of the form inside of my form tag, but I know that I don't have that form method defined right now. So if I reload, we are going to, well, I don't see anything, but I see that there is an error happening in the console. But it's not even, the error isn't even getting shown on the page because I think like it's crashing my whole program. And probably that is because I'm trying to do like a block and an end, and we don't have the method defined. So I'm just going to go straight away and define the method real quick. So I'll go back to my framework, and I'm going to go to the lib jetski helpers folder, and then we'll go to the view helpers where we have our view helpers defined, and we have our render defined here. Let's go down and let's define a form method, and I'm just gonna do it, just define it like this, def form, reload, and hopefully it'll fix the error. It looks like we're still getting an error though. So I wonder what's the problem here. It's just, it really doesn't like this. Syntax errors found. Expected a block beginning with do to end with end. Oh. So we have our form, and then we have a do, and I have an end down here, but for some reason it's not working. So like the do end is not working with ERB. Not work. So I'm gonna look up ERB not working with blocks. And we have a question right here on Stack Overflow. Why is this block not working on my ERB template? It says you are passing a block to render, but which is doing nothing with it. Oh, I think this is Rails specific. So yeah, this is like a Rails specific sort of thing. So this isn't gonna help me. We have another guy asking blocks in ERB. I'm having a problem with setting up a block. I get the following error: undefined method block called from ERB. Okay. I guess that doesn't really help me. Oh, maybe I need to wrap this in parentheses, although I don't see how that would really help. Just really doesn't like what's happening here. It says block in Jetski, perform view render. Syntax errors found. Unexpected. Now it doesn't like the parentheses. So maybe what I should do for now is let's just go back to what we had, right? Go back in time and revert the changes. Let's refresh. Everything's working. Okay, that's good. Now what I want to do is right next to this, let's just try to run like our form method and see if this works. And I mean, I don't see any problems. It looks like it's running. And then if we go back over to our view helpers and let's just try to like say something here. Hello world. Reload. As you can see, we have hello world printed right there. So that is working. And now, what if I try to do a block? So we say form do, and then say end. I just want to see, does this block work? We refresh. Nope, we get an error. So it's saying like syntax errors found. It doesn't like using a block inside of here, which is weird. Now maybe it's because the method doesn't expect a block. But I think you're able to pass in a block to any method, but we could explicitly write this, or no, it's not like that, it's like this, and block. Still, nope. It does not like that we are doing this. Now I have another guess why you're not able to do a block inside of the ERB template, and it might be because the way that I'm doing my code. So I'm actually already using a block on my render. So if I go to my view renderer, you'll see in perform view render, I'm running process ERB, and then I'm passing a block to render the template inside of here. And then the way that that's working is when the layout file is, I guess, ran, there's a yield inside of it. So if we go to our social app and we go to layouts application, you'll see that there's a yield inside of here, just like how Rails has a yield inside of their application layout. And this is going to be used to render the content of the page. Now I'm wondering, so maybe because we're already using a block, if we try to do a block inside of there, it's having some issues. But that doesn't really seem like why it would be breaking, because I feel like you should be able to do as many blocks as you want, as long as you're not doing anything the wrong way, which I don't think I'm doing it the wrong way. I think I'm doing it fine. So why can I not pass a block in? And this is probably one of the trickier scenarios compared to the other view helpers, which might be like a link to. That would have been super easy. But this form method it's kind of tricky. So maybe I should go to the ERB GitHub and look for issues. I don't even see any issues on here. There's not even an issues section. Ruby ERB method with block not working. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, I want to try to figure this out real quick, but I might just take a break because this is kind of annoying. So annoying. Like, why? I'm just trying to pass a block. I'm gonna ask ChatGPT real quick, just because they might sometimes, like, they really know about random stuff like this. Like, this is what a robot wants to see. say I'm trying to run this method inside of ERB render, ERB template, but it's causing an error. So the blocks not work inside of ERB templates. And I'm just gonna take a break from the video and come back. Okay, this is actually hilarious. So it's saying blocks do work, but I'm using the wrong ERB tag. So when you use the equal sign on the ERB tag, it tries to print it and it tries to run it as a line of code. So apparently, but then no, because inside of Ruby on Rails, you do use the equal sign because you know you want to print it to the page. And I do want to print it to the page. So the question still is like, why does it work in Rails and not inside of my own ERB? It says it's a statement. ERB tries to turn it into Ruby like this. So it tries to, shovel in this one line. And it says the fix, don't use the equal sign. And it says why Rails looks different. In Rails, helpers like form width are special. They use capture internally, which allows this syntax. This works only because Rails helpers are designed to return captured HTML. So I want to do the same thing as Rails to allow this behavior. Oh, maybe I have to pass an argument. Form do F. What if I pass in the block argument? Does that magically fix the syntax error? No, it still doesn't work. We still get an error. So we need to somehow internally do this. It says if you're outside of Rails, you need to create your own version, which means doing all of this stuff. Oh. Okay, I don't want to do that. I'm going to take a break from this. I think the form tag is going to be the hardest one to build, definitely. So I might not do this one first. Okay, guys, so it looks like creating a helper like the form tag is going to be a lot harder than I thought. Now, I could just get rid of the equal sign, right, and just do it like this. And, oh, look at that, it still works. But the problem is it's not going to actually return anything from this method. It's going to allow us to do a block, but it's not going to allow me to print out the return from the form, which I need to do because I need to, as you can see right here, I need to create this form tag and print it on the page. So this is going to be trickier than I thought. So I'm not going to do that right now because I want to get to that later. And I want to also try to figure that out by myself. So yeah, I want to do that later. But I might do it on video. I don't know. So from here, what I will do is I'm going to try to define some other helpers. So let's go back to the views post index page. And I'm going to define a link to helper. So we can get that out of the way. What we're going to do is we're going to go to our Jetski code. Let's go back to our view helpers module, and I'm just going to get rid of that form method because I don't want to see that anymore. And we don't have that. We don't want to work on that right now. Instead, let's define a link to. And inside of here, we can define our argument. So if you think about inside of Ruby on Rails, how does this usually work? So we have the link text. I'll put that as the first argument. And we can do a comment just to visualize this. So if we have like a link to, let's say, new post, and this goes to /post/new. So that's what we're basically expecting. So we'd have our link text, and then we have the URL. And then after that, we have our HTML options. And I'm going to do the same thing we did for locals. I'm going to use the double stars. And I'll just call this HTML options, or I could say HTML ops for short. And inside of here, we can then construct our HTML element. So we can just do this by hand, but I know this is going to get tricky. But we could do like a. For now, we could do href, and just do this all in a string. And I'm going to do single quotes because inside of a double quote string, you can't do double quotes unless you escape them. At least I think, although I don't see any issue here. But inside of the href, we're going to put the URL. Then we can end the a tag and add the ending a tag right here. And inside of here, we can pass the link text. And this is a very bare minimal link to helper, but we're not putting the HTML options in right now. And I want to reload. And oh, we haven't really done anything. So what I want to do is I want to replace this new post link with our link to. So let's go to the social app, and I'll just do a link to. I'll just do the same thing, new posts. This is going to, it's actually just going to the pound sign because we're using JavaScript. But we should be able to do something like this, like link to, and we're passing in the link text and the URL. And we can even grab like the class, which would be new post button. And then for the data attribute, let's get to that in a second. Let's reload. Okay, so here we go. We have our button right here, and it looks like it is working correctly. The only difference is that we don't have the class to apply the styling, and we also don't have the data attribute to actually trigger opening the modal. So right now it does work though. We're able to create a link, so that's very cool. And that's really how easy it is, like in Ruby. That's why I love when I figured out you can just build like helper methods inside of Rails. I really love that, and I liked creating methods to, return a chunk of HTML and like stick some JavaScript in there too, and then it's like a really cool. You can just write a little bit of Ruby, and it will like add a whole UI element to the page. So I love doing stuff like that. Anyways, back to the challenge at hand, which is creating the link to helper. So we have our link to defined right here. We are doing the URL and the link text correctly, but now I want to convert the HTML options into attributes as strings. And what I was thinking for this is that I should probably define a method that does this, because I'm going to want to call this for all of the other HTML elements later on. So we need to be able to convert a hash, or like, a bunch of key value pairs into strings just like this, the href equals the value. So that should be super easy if you think about it. So what I'll do is I'll put a space right here, and then I'm going to interpolate, and then I'll call some method like convert, or like create HTML options, or parse, we can call it format HTML options, and then just pass in HTML ops. And this will be a method that we define right underneath here, and we are going to expect our HTML options right here. And I think we also have to pass this in using the double star, so we're not just passing it in as a single hash. And now we're passing that, and then what we have to do inside of here is we have to loop through the HTML options, and we also have to remember that we need to return this as a string. So ideally we return this as a string that looks like this, and with the data attribute and everything. So what we can do is we can map over our HTML options, and for arguments we have key and value, and then we're just going to return a string. So let's do double quotes, and then we can pass in key equals value. And it's really as simple as that for now. And then at the end we can say join, because the result of a map is going to be an array, and we can call join on an array and join them together with a space. So we'll do quotes, and we'll just have one white space character inside of there. And then I'm going to restart the server, and boom, it works. We have the class on here, but we don't have the data attribute. So that's the part that we're going to have to figure out. And this is where it gets a little bit trickier, because we have this working right now, but it's just going to pass a key to a value, and then it's going to set it on the HTML attribute. But here's where the trick is. What if there's a space between the attribute, like data dash modal dash toggle? So how do we handle these dashes? So in the link to, you can't really just say data modal dash toggle. Well, you can actually, I've seen this before, but you have to wrap it in a string and then use a string as the key for the key value. That is one way to handle it, but in Rails, I usually see the ability to pass a hash. But anyways, for adding the dash, really what it is you use an underscore. So we should be able to say like data underscore modal underscore toggle. And this would be probably the most minimal solution. So we'd have to convert the underscores to dashes, which, I mean, that should be super easy. So I'm going to set the value as new post. And then we have to go back to our Jetski view helper and work on converting this key to an HTML friendly key. So let's just say format key, or we can say, yeah, formatted key equals, and then we can say key, and let's just use gsub. So we can gsub, which just means it's going to look for some character and replace it with something else. So we can pass in underscore and replace it with dash, and then use that for the resulted HTML option. And if we refresh, we get an undefined method gsub for a symbol. So I guess the key is a symbol and gsub only works on a string. So we can just simply convert our key to a string before we gsub it. That's fine with me. And boom, there we go. It looks like it works. We have the class, and we click and it opens the modal. So boom, we have a link to helper defined. That's super cool. So now I can go and delete the a tag. And we now have replaced it with Ruby code and a view helper, just like in Rails. So yeah, I'm really happy with this. It was super easy to build too. I kind of knew it was going to be easy, but like it's a lot of fun too when you build stuff like this and you get to like use the map and different things. There's probably ways to optimize this as well, but for right now I'm very happy. And from here, what else can we do? Well, how about we work on replacing some of the helpers inside of the form, because those should be easy to do. So we can start with the button. We can make that, we can do a button to tag. So I'm going to go back to the social app, and let's go to our modal partial, and then we can go down to our button right here. So it's basically the same thing. I just want to be able to say, you know, button, and then pass in the text, so it'll be create post. And the difference between a button and a link is a button isn't going to have a URL. We're just going to get straight into the options. So I'm going to say like type submit. We'll pass in our class, create post button, and then really that's it. So I'm just going to delete this right away, and I expect that this should work. Now, again with the names, what do I want to call this? I guess I just said button to, but that's not even what they call it inside of Rails. They call it button underscore tag. So if I want to really just copy Rails, I could just start using the tag. But I kind of feel like dropping that because I want to be more minimal, more simple, right? So why not just call it button? And then for the link, that could just be also link. But I feel like link to is kind of nice. I like that sound because I'm saying like I want to link to this link, right? So it seems more like a readable method name. Now, what about for button? We could say button to create post, or we could say button tag. See, it's kind of tricky. What do I want to use? Why don't we do button to? Because maybe that's something that like if you remember the link to, you could use button to, and it's like super easy to remember. So let's go with that. So let's create a button to method. We're going to expect the button text and then the HTML options. And again, I could do a little comment just to imagine this. So we have button to click me, and then maybe we have a class cool button. So something like this is what we're expecting. So we can just go and create the button HTML. And of course we have the button text inside. And we have our HTML options right here. So again, I'm just going to basically copy the same code. This is going to format the HTML options in an HTML friendly way. Let's reload. And we should have just replaced the button from HTML to Ruby, and it works the same way. As you can see, I just created a blank post. This is awesome. We got a button to helper now. I'm going to create posts, and check it out. It works still exactly the same way, but we now have this cool helper on the page to use. Now, the other thing I want to do definitely is I want to get rid of these labels. So in Rails, I always say like, you know, label. But another thing that's different is that Uh, I usually do this in the context of a form. So if I was gonna say like form.label, and then I would put like title, that's how I would do it. And when you do it in that context, it automatically knows that we're in the context of like the posts, section because we passed in a model. So I want to figure out all of that stuff. It's gonna be a little bit different, so I might have to save that for another video. Um, but I could do like an input tag, just like Rails has an input tag that's separate from the form dot input helper. So we should be able to say an input tag still and then pass in like, some HTML options just to be able to do this in Ruby instead of HTML, which I like doing it this way. So we can try to define an input tag for now. So if we go back to Jetski, we can define our input tag, which really is just going to expect HTML options. And then it's going to return, an input. And an input is a self-closing HTML element anyways. So then all we have to do is add this code again to format the HTML options. And it's super easy that's like so easy, honestly. Although it doesn't look the same, so there must have been some glitch here. We have our name, our input with a name and a class. Oh, but it looks like there's a slash inside of the class, so I did that wrong. Wait, why is that happening actually? So format HTML options is, oh, what's going on here? Look, inside of the class, there's a slash inside of there. And then there's not a slash on the end of the input. So there's like some sort of bug here. So maybe I'll try to add a space in between this method call. Let's see. Oh yeah, that worked. So there was some sort of issue, but wait, then the slash doesn't even come through. Oh, I think I see what's happening. Maybe like, in Ruby, they might parse out slash because it's a special character. I'm not really sure. Or maybe an input doesn't even need like an ending thing, so maybe I won't even do that. Yeah, it looks like, okay, we just won't use the slash and it'll work. And we could also do a text area tag, which is the same concept, HTML options. And I think one difference is that you're able to pass in a value for the text area, but we could, here, we'll do that. So we're going to return a string, which is going to have the text area HTML tag. And then, yeah, here's the difference where the value for a text area shouldn't be set like value equals. It should actually be put inside of the text area. So we need to parse these HTML options and say like, I think you can say except, right, in Ruby. So the ones that we pass in to format HTML options, we're gonna want to not pass in the value. So if we're able to say like HTML options except value, and then inside of here we could just pass HTML ops value. Ideally that does work. Let's see, reload. I don't see an error. Although I don't think I actually, yeah, I didn't try to use this yet. So I need to go back to the social app and replace my text area with the text area tag. And we'll do the name, class, fields. We can add that style. And I guess we're not passing in a value anyways because we're not editing the post yet. We're just creating it, so it always starts off kind of empty. Now I did see a difference there. It looks like the style. Oh yeah, look, because of the strings inside the style, it's kind of getting messed up. I also see up here the label. I guess the 4 is just empty. That's why. Yeah, the 4 is empty. So we don't even need to have that there. but that's not causing the error. So the problem here is because our style tag, I guess it doesn't like the syntax here for whatever reason. So it's messing it up. So now we have like this weird string thing. That's weird. So if we go to our helper, I might just need to debug this real quick. Reload. Here we are. So I wanted to see, what does this look like? Yeah, it looks like, oh, you know what's happening? I see what's happening. It's a really simple fix. So in the format HTML options, I was kind of thinking about this, but we're setting our key equal value. But the way that HTML works is you usually want to wrap your values in strings. And I totally forgot about that. I wasn't thinking. So that's like super simple. Yeah, now everything works. And I think even that bug like before, like the reason why I added that space right here, that's probably also fixed now. Like on the link to, right up here. Or I think, yeah, it was right there. I think that should be fixed now. Yeah, look, it's not a problem because now we added the strings correctly. Yeah, it's awesome. So boom, we got a link to, we got a button to. This is really cool. URL or view helpers are awesome. I'm gonna have to build URL helpers soon too. But that's a whole different thing. I'm just happy to build this for now. And yeah, also we got past all of those different challenges in this video. So I hope you guys enjoyed it anyways. And I'll come back soon to work on more of these challenges and just show you guys what it's like to build a web framework. Boom. Yeah, I think this has been a long enough video, so I'm just going to stop it here. But stay tuned for more videos, and thank you guys for watching and following along. If you do want to work on this project or check it out and try it out, it's available on GitHub, and I'll leave the link to it in the video description. But yeah, I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching.